when you shut her down, like it appeared Washington State did at halftime, it's hard to get that momentum back. It really is. You try, but something's not right. And they have struggled on the road. They have had tougher games on the road than they have at home. So that should have been a lesson, and they should have been prepared. They're still a good football team, but that was one that they let get away.
Good evening and welcome to Pac-12 After Dark. I'm Erik Coleman here with Coach Nick Aliotti, here to break down all the happenings in the Pac-12. Coach Aliotti, it was a rough one. It was a rough night for the Pac. Washington State getting beat 38-35 by New Mexico, and Air Force dominating Oregon State. What did you think about this Washington State game, Coach? What are your first thoughts?
Well, I'm going to start off with the positive. John Mateer now, 4 touchdown passes, 370-something yards passing, another rushing touchdown. He accounted for 5 touchdowns, which is, I think, the 5th time this season he's accounted for 5 touchdowns, which is incredible. And we've said it all year, Erik, that Mateer has, really been the difference maker. Now, in the second half, it appeared to me like Washington State thought this thing was in the bag, up 28-14. And they only were able to get 1 touchdown in the second half, and that was to take the lead with about 4 minutes to go, go ahead 35-31. So the bottom line, Erik, let's face it, defensively, I've kind of had my concerns all year. And when you look at New Mexico, they ran the ball for 350-plus yards, and most of those were quarterback runs. So they couldn't stop the quarterback run, whether it was inside or outside, and that was the bottom line. And they had everything in front of them. And I know I've gone long here, but they had everything in front of them. We both thought they could go 11-1. They're still having a good season, could have a great season, but not being able to stop the run, particularly there had to be film of that quarterback running, and that's what he did mainly, and they couldn't stop it.
Yeah, Coach. You and I have been talking about the fact that Washington State has struggled against the run. And, as defensive guys, the number one thing that you go into every game is stopping the run. You can't let teams run down the middle of your defense. It opens you up for everything. You're susceptible to play action. You're susceptible to, if they can move the chains running the football, you're in trouble. And, hey, Coach, if I don't hear the name Devin Dampier for the rest of the year, I'll be a happy. Now, that kid was special. I have to give credit to New Mexico. He rushed for 193 yards on the ground, 360 yards total rushing for New Mexico. And, if you're Washington State, that's kind of what things have been trending towards. A lot of times they have the luxury of playing with the lead, and teams aren't able to run the football on them. But, when teams are counterpunching, they didn't have an answer. And, I agree with you, Coach, that something happened at halftime. Washington State went in, and I feel like they got comfortable. They got a little comfortable and complacent. New Mexico came out, scored 14 points in that third quarter, and it kind of shook them. It kind of shook Washington State. They got punched in the mouth and didn't really know how to react. So definitely a lot of things to learn from if you're the Cougs. One thing I will go back on, Coach, is you talked about it, John Mateer, and how phenomenal he's been. 4 touchdowns in the air. Kyle Williams, 3 touchdowns. He was unstoppable. It was like whenever Kyle Williams went deep, that was the answer. And no one could guard him. And, he had a fantastic game. He's been playing well all season. But, I believe 191 yards in the air. Definitely a positive for Washington State. And, Coach, we were excited about the opportunity at Washington State going to the playoff. Obviously those chances are probably not going to happen. But it's been a great year so far for Washington State. They're 8-2. What do you see in the future of this season for Washington State?
Well, I tell you what, whenever I got a 10-win season, I always thought that 10 was a magical number. No, more than 10 is outstanding, but 10-win seasons, double-digit win seasons, and that's all in front of them. They play an Oregon State team that these are two of our teams, Oregon State and Washington State, but they play Oregon State, and then I think they play Wyoming, I believe. I'm not looking at it right now, but 2 winnable games. Now, on the road, so, I think they're going to have a great season. Unfortunately, teams like BYU and Tennessee and Kansas State, some teams up there were going to fall. Had they just got the win, that being Washington State, they're going to probably be in the top 15 or 14 with 2 weeks to go. I hate to say that. Now, the one thing, and we touched on this, and I'm kind of going off a little bit sidetracked, but I've been in games, not too many, but when you shut her down, like it appeared Washington State did at halftime, it's hard to get that momentum back. It really is. You try, but something's not right. And they have struggled on the road. They have had tougher games on the road than they have at home. So that should have been a lesson, and they should have been prepared. They're still a good football team, but that was one that they let get away.
Yeah, Coach, I think back to my career at Washington State, and, there are some different opportunities that we had. The year that we went to the Rose Bowl, I think we were 5th in the country at the time, went into the Apple Cup and played a Huskies team that I think they had 5 wins. And, we were playing great football leading up to that point, looking at going to the Fiesta Bowl, and we let Washington hang around. And when you let teams hang around, they start building that confidence. When you're a dominant team, you have to put these teams away. You have to establish your will to win and continue to keep their foot on their neck and put them away. And Washington State will learn how to do that. They're a young team. They're continuing to grow. And hopefully this is just a stepping stone for the Washington State program. But, Coach, we're going to take a break. When we come back, let's talk about those Beavs. Welcome back to Pac-12 After Dark. Erik Coleman, Nick Aliotti here to break down everything that happened in the Pac-12. Earlier today, Oregon State had a tough loss to the Air Force Cadets, losing 28-0. Coach, what are your initial thoughts on this shutout loss for the Beavers?
That's a bad loss. I think Oregon State, this is going to be weird for me to say, but I think Oregon State should be physically better than Air Force. But when you play an option team, a triple option team, dive, quarterback, pitch, you must be very disciplined. Now, I don't think Oregon State wasn't disciplined, and they really didn't get hurt that much on the perimeter. But here's the problem. It's dive, people have the dive, then quarterback, then pitch. Well, they never really stopped the dive. The dive was going for 4, for 5, for 4, for 5. And that's exactly what an Air Force team wants to do. Get 4, and then get 2 or 3 and make the first down. Air Force kept the ball for 45 minutes. Now, I could be a couple seconds off, 30 seconds, for 45 minutes of that 60-minute game. And as you know, that's a recipe. There's no way. That's exactly what Air Force wanted, okay? And that not stopping the dive for whatever reason. And again, I come back to Air Force, the academies don't get these big bodies, a lot of big bodies like the other schools do, because they have these certain requirements to get into school, blah, blah, blah. I won't go way into that. So physically, Oregon State should have been able to handle that. But the bottom line, on defense, they weren't able to stop the dive, and that killed them. Air Force possessed the ball.
Coach, it looked like my high school team. We used to run the veer offense. You remember that? And it was the dive option, and it's tough to stop if you're not disciplined on defense. And you're right. If you have to guard that defense, you have to guard that offense inside out. And if your tackles aren't able to hold up, if you're not able to stop that dive, then that's just the beginning of how you're going to continue to get beat. But how difficult, Coach, is it to prepare for an option team when you look at the rest of the country, everyone's spread out, everyone's throwing the ball around the field. How difficult is it to only have a couple of days where you have 1 week to prepare and implement that defense?
It's extremely difficult, extremely, because you have to be very disciplined. Guys' eyes got to be right, and you got to be disciplined. But I'm hammering this, but when you can't stop the inside run, I mean, that was the whole problem, basically, defensively for him. Now, when we used to play an option team, because I wanted to be very disciplined, we would snap a Nerf ball, okay? We would do it without a ball. And that way, it made us be extremely difficult. We snap a Nerf ball because nobody could trip or whatever now, and everybody had the ball. The dive had the ball, the quarterback had the ball, and the pitch had the ball. And that's how we went about defending that. And it really helped us. Now, I never saw – the other thing I remember, it's been a long time since I played an option team, but inside blitzes, hitting those gaps and taking away that dive, changing that up, really can be a helpful towards you stopping that. But it's when a team does it all year round and you have 1 week to prepare, I'm sure they spent some time in other practice sessions defending that because you have to, because it's hard to get ready 1 week. But the bottom line is they couldn't stop the simplest part of that triple option, which was the dive. And then to move on, offensively, Oregon State did nothing. They couldn't do anything. I mean, I think they had less than 200 yards of offense against a team where your skilled athletes should be better than Air Force's skilled athletes. So we've talked about quarterback problems with them all year and not being able to be a team that can throw it down the field and stress you out. And it came true in yesterday's game against Air Force.
Yeah, Coach, when you are an Oregon State team who's built to run the football and you get down a couple of touchdowns, it is very difficult, as we've seen, for them to be able to play from behind and put up points. No Ben Goldbrinson on this trip. Jabari Johnson got most of the reps. Giovanni McCoy got a couple of reps. What do things look like for Oregon State moving throughout the rest of the year and then moving in the next year? As far as that quarterback position, we've seen a constant shuffle at that position with not really much consistency from the play of the quarterback.
Well, the old saying is if you have two quarterbacks, you really don't have one. And they've shuffled three. Now, I think Trent Bray's a good football coach, and I think he runs a good program. But the bottom line right now is when you have no passing threat, okay, you have no passing threat, and then you're playing a team like Air Force that their whole plan is to possess the ball and keep your offense off the field. You get limited possessions, and then when you get limited possessions and you're not stopping them, and they're holding on the ball, and you're behind, as you mentioned, and you have to throw it to score or to catch up, that's not Oregon State's recipe. So I think moving forward, they're going to be a good team under Trent Bray down the road in the future. But right now, they're reeling. They're not a very good football team. And to think that they have probably two of their toughest games remaining in Washington State and Boise State, this was a team that let a couple games get away that should be a bowl team, but they're going to have a hard time doing that now.
Absolutely. And, for Oregon State, they're going to have to stay together as a unit and continue to thrive. It's times like this when things aren't going your way that things tend to stray. And it's going to be important for the leadership of Oregon State to keep these guys together, keep them focused on task, and continuing to chop wood and get better each and every game. Even though, you're playing against a Washington State team, you're playing against a Boise State team that, all the odds are against you. Why not try to stay together as a team, go out there and shock the world and end the season on a high note? We got Washington State headed down to Corvallis to face Oregon State. Coach, what are your thoughts on this game? When I think about it, this is a perfect recipe for Oregon State right now. They're a team that runs the football well. Washington State struggles against the run. They're playing at home. The Beavers play well at Research Stadium, and Washington State struggles a little bit on the road. So if you're Washington State, You've got to make sure that you correct a lot of those mistakes that you made against New Mexico. You come out and you throw punches at the beginning and you don't let off the gas. But if you're Oregon State, if you can slow down John Mateer, put some points on the board, run that football, control the clock, listen, Oregon State may have a shot.
I think it's going to be a very close game. I couldn't agree with you more. Oregon State playing at home is much more dangerous. Now, hopefully they'll have Ben Gobranson back because that opens up, with their good running game, also opens up the passing game a little bit more for them. But Oregon State is going to face another team that features quarterback runs, okay? And this has been a problem for them. And conversely, Washington State has struggled against the run, and Oregon State wants to run it. So I think this game, where I thought Washington State before last weekend was clearly the favorite, I think this thing's within a touchdown. And because Oregon State plays at home, they'll be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, I agree, Coach. And Coach, just to go back on that, we've had a lot of these running quarterbacks who have had a lot of success. And for me as a safety, that is absolutely my worst nightmare. Facing a team with a quarterback that can run the ball and who can throw it. So, as a safety, you're the last line of defense. You're covering up for everyone's mistakes, but you also have to fill the alley. You also have to enforce the run. And for me, it was always tough when you place those quarterbacks that can run the ball because, one, they have an extra blocker. It was like almost having an extra man in the box. Then you're less focused on the deep ball. You're less focused on that tight end. So, if you're not disciplined, that tight end is going to run by you. That slot receiver is going to run by you, or that post is going to run right behind you. And it just makes things very difficult. And then when you're in coverage, now you have to not only cover for an extended period of time. When that quarterback does tuck the ball and run, you're 30 yards away from him. And this is an athlete who's coming down the field with bad intentions, who can make you miss. And so when I think about guys like John Mateer, I can understand why there's such weapons. When I look at earlier's game, Devin Dampier, I can see why they're such a problem for a defense because it's just an element that you're not really used to. It's tough to prepare for. And if your front four doesn't, make them bubble or get some penetration, it's a long day for your linebackers and your safety. So John Mateer is going to have to run the ball well, for Washington State to continue this success. But just my thoughts on those two teams struggling against the run. It's definitely a tough spot to be in for a secondary.
Yeah, I think Oregon State going to have to go back to what made them good early in the year, possess the ball, play action pass, keep Washington State's offense off the field because, let's face it, Washington State has a better offense, in my opinion, because of how Mateer is playing, because of the receiver threats that they could throw down the field, and then they run it very well. Whereas Oregon State is more of a running team, but as we mentioned earlier, I think Gobranson would give them a little bit more of a passing attack, and that makes that game a little bit closer to me. But so it'll be interesting. If Gobranson plays, I think the game's pretty even. Give a slight edge to Washington State, and then you got Oregon State at home, which may tip it back to Oregon State. So I think it's going to be a very, very close game. The first Pac-12 championship. Who's going to be the champion? Washington State or Oregon State?
Let's do it. I can't wait to break that down with you next week, Coach. And thank you for your breakdowns. I love listening to you chat about these teams. Hopefully Oregon State and Washington State take some of your pointers because, you brought up some valid points about how they can get better as a team. But, for Nick Aliotti, I'm Erik Coleman. Come back with us next week. We're going to break down Washington State, Oregon State. Thank you for hanging out with us. Have a great week.